everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Balthazar.
And this was a brutal week, pretty much top to bottom, for all of the sports, actually, though we do have a new football hire to cover, which, depending on how you view, that could also be added on to the list of moments. But before we get into the episode, we, of course, always have to thank Grandma. So thank you, Grandma. But let's just go ahead and dive straight in to the first bit of news, and that is the announcement of the new tight ends coach at Kansas State University, and it is Luke Wells. If that name sounds familiar, it's because it should. It's Matt Wells' the new offensive coordinator's younger brother, I believe.
I believe so.
And he's going to be the new tight ends coach. He was the recruiting coordinator and had a few stops. He pretty much followed Matt Wells everywhere he went. He was the recruiting coordinator at Utah State, and I believe he was the receivers coach there as well for a while.
Yep.
Underwhelming, I think, is probably the best way to say it. I mean, I know it's tight ends, so I do like that we have the receivers experience with teaching the tight end from Luke Wells, so he has experience in the receiving game. But there's just nothing about the hire that I find particularly inspiring. Do I think it's like this abysmal hire, it's I'm not going to say that nepotism didn't play a role, because A, I'm not in the room, and B, I sincerely doubt that is true. But I don't think that it's this ungodly, awful hire. It's just kind of terribly underwhelming to me.
Underwhelming is a perfect word, I think, for it, because this was always going to be the hire that was going to be an external hire. And so when you hear that, you kind of get your hopes up and start to think, okay, maybe we're going to really get some new blood in, kind of like what we did with Brian LePack originally when he was brought in to be an analyst, because that was kind of an interesting hire at the time, and he quickly rose to tight ends coach. So seeing it be just the younger brother of the recently not really promoted but solidified offensive coordinator Matt Wells, it's not like an objectively terrible hire. It's just, like you said, it's underwhelming. He's had an interesting career. I mean, like, from Oklahoma, played at Oklahoma, was a student assistant there. Obviously, the more recent stuff, he crossed over with Courtney Messingham at Iowa State. So there's an interesting connection there. Then, of course, he spent a lot of time with his brother, Matt. Then spent a year at Tulsa coaching the tight ends, and then took a step down to be the head coach of Bixby High School in Oklahoma, which I wouldn't read too much into that. Apparently, he just wanted to step back from the grind of coaching at the college level just to be able to watch his kids play football, which, fair play, I guess, man. Like, have a family, fine, whatever. But no, you're right. This is largely an underwhelming hire. I suppose we've been mostly negative about it. I'll try and log a few benefits. One of them is going to be, of course, there's a very high degree of familiarity between the new tight ends coach and the offensive coordinator. So they should ideally be on the same page. Another one is that he should be pretty easy to integrate into the staff as well, just in terms of getting up to speed with the system. So that should be a decent bit there. And then another one is that the tight ends coach is almost always, for one reason or another, I kind of thought of as the low man on the totem pole when it comes to coaching staffs. I don't know why that is, like why tight ends coach has just kind of been singled out as being like the worst assistant, or like being a super analyst or something. I don't know, but
I think it's probably because tight ends will split a lot of their time working with both the offensive line and receivers coaches. So it's kind of seemed that they have the least amount on their plate, both in terms of position group size and sort of responsibility.
yeah, I didn't know that. So that's some fun education here. I didn't realize that the tight ends would so heavily split time that I would take away from the tight ends coach actually having things to do. So the more you know, you always learn something on this podcast.
And it could be different at K-State because I know different programs do it differently, but
Well,
I know
that part can't be true. I'm sure that everyone does everything exactly the same.
Exactly. The other big upside that I see with hiring Luke Wells is he's going to be a plus recruiter just because he's had that experience as a recruiting coordinator. And Matt Wells always recruited very well, even when he was at Utah State as both the OC, quarterbacks coach, head coach. And his classes at Texas Tech weren't that bad either, even though Texas Tech is just apparently the recruiting powerhouse that no one is able to kind of explain why. I mean, we can explain it now, it's NIL, but yeah, I as from a recruiting standpoint, I think it's a fine hire. From a coaching standpoint, I think it's just kind of but I mean, it's the tight ends coach, so I'm not going to lose sleep over it either way.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it. And again, this is like Kleiman's had a unusually consistent staff composition, particularly over the last few years. Typically, you see a lot more turnover at various positions along the staff, but Kleiman has, for the most part, really retained a pretty similar staff this whole time that he's been here. So whenever we see a new hire pop up, that's the opportunity for an exciting change. So I think that's why there's been so much disappointment with this one, is that it's not really any substantive change. In fact, it's kind of like doubling down, literally, on the Wells control of the offense.
Yeah, I'm still amazed how BA hasn't been poached. And Klanderman too.
I really don't get it with BA. I figure that maybe he just really likes it. I don't know, maybe he just likes Kleiman and is waiting on him to retire. Klanderman is definitely surprising too. I feel like he should be like kind of near the top of the list next time some of those top FCS jobs open up for head coach. But I don't know, man. I don't know. Whatever Kleiman is doing is generally working, and I think a lot of people. I won't go too far into this because it's outside the scope of the recap. But Klanderman is a better defensive coordinator than people give him credit for.
Yeah, that's a discussion for another day. But yeah, that's our thoughts on the hiring of Luke Wells. We're also going to do a little bit of a different format this week for just how we're going to talk about things, because it was across all three sports, men's and women's basketball and baseball, K-State went 2-7. If we went 7-2, that'd be a very exciting week. But we are going to start. We're not going to go as deep into game by game. We're just kind of going to go based off of vibes and where they're at in the season up to this point. And it's hard to say that it wasn't a swift kick to the nether regions for pretty much all three sports. But the women's team at least won a game. They kicked the crap out of a bad UCF team, 97-67, and then end up dropping a game in remarkably frustrating fashion up against West Virginia in Morgantown on primetime, not primetime, but Prime Network, Big Boy Fox, at the opposite of primetime, 1 p.m. on a Monday. And the big takeaway is every time that K-State has lost a game this year, it's because the other team's star player just goes nuclear, which, granted, 20, I think it was 26 or 28 points for JJ Quinterly isn't her going nuclear. That's just kind of her on a Tuesday. But that game was very, very important for K-State. All of them are at this point. There's 3 games left in the season, and now they have to hope that TCU drops a game so that they're back into an even standing with one another to share a Big 12 title for the regular season. But that also could very much dampen K-State's chances to get a host seed, because they were sitting on the 3 line. I believe they were the 12th overall seed in the most recent women's bracketology. And this honestly may kick them down to, that 14, 15 line where you're just hoping that you're able to hang on to a host site by your nails. And the worst part is that I think that this team is vastly superior in just about every single way from last year's team that did host. It's just they picked a bad time to start dropping games.
Yeah, remarkably frustrating sequence of events here for women's basketball. Of course, it's not been too long since that horrible loss to Oklahoma State, but this was really a must-win game for Big 12 title contention. And it's not that it's impossible now, but it's that we now need other teams to lose. And we also have 3 games left that we could lose. We need to take care of business against KU, and then we have a very quick turnaround. We're hosting Baylor on Monday night, and then we travel up to Ames on a Sunday, and that's not going to be an easy game either. I mean, we
went to want revenge.
Yeah, they're going to want revenge. We went to overtime with them when they came here. The benefit will be that Yokuli will be back, but we had a Yokuli, I think, when we played them in Ames last year, and we didn't win that game. So it's a challenging slate. So at this point, K-State just needs to do what it can do to win out. But yeah, at this point, we're going to need some help to get a share of the Big 12 championship, which is wildly disappointing.
Yeah, and if you're looking for some degree of silver lining to it, the main contenders that we're fighting up against or that K-State is fighting up against for the share of the Big 12 title is TCU, which I feel like we've mentioned them at this point once a week, but it's now we're actually talking about the team and not one particularly bad person that's on the team. But they don't have, they have 2 games that they very well could lose as well. They do play West Virginia, but that's a home match, and they do play up against Baylor, but that's in Waco. So, and they also play a really bad Houston team. But
5-20 Houston might really give them a run for their money.
If they lose to 5-20 Houston, I'm gonna laugh so hard.
To be fair, though, like that is like the most obvious letdown game of all time, sandwiched between 2 top 20 matchups or top 25 matchups. No, they are top 20. Baylor's 19th. So, you get 21-5 West Virginia home on a battle for the Big 12 championship. Baylor, you're in a tiebreaker with them, and then you get them that following Sunday, and then you have that Wednesday game against 5-20 Houston that I may have not won this year. So that is a classic letdown. No, Houston has won this year. Remember, they beat Oklahoma State.
Oh my God.
It's just insane. TCU definitely could drop some games, and K-State faces Baylor, so we control our destiny in that sense only. If TCU wins out, then and we beat Baylor, then I guess we just give TCU an uncontested claim to the championship. But if we just beat West Virginia, this would have mattered.
Yeah, and I think that's the most frustrating part is 3 consecutive letdown games away. Yeah, because it was a letdown game up against Colorado, who we had no business losing against. Then getting the doors blown off of us by, I still think, a probably underrated Oklahoma State team, especially in Stillwater, because apparently K-State can never escape Stillwater being a house of horrors, no matter what sport it's in. And then dropping against it. I don't want to make it sound like West Virginia's a bad team. In fact, they're not. They're a quite good team, and J.J. Quinterly should win Big 12 Player of the Year. And she won't. That'll probably be Audie Crooks, but J.J. Quinterly deserves it. But it's just having those 3 road losses really puts a damper on things. And I'll admit I'm looking ahead a bit. I'm just assuming that because good things can't happen to K-State, I'm just assuming that TCU is going to win the Big 12 because they sold their soul for a domestic abuser. And then I'm just assuming my main priority is the women's team hosting again, because there is no reason why this team should play themselves out of a host seed. And if they do stay the course, they win a few games in KC, I think it's pretty well secure. Well, I think if they stay the course right now is in win out and then 1-1, 2-1 in Kansas City, they probably pretty safely control a host seed. It's when you drop one of those games before the tournament, that's when I start getting scared.
I think that this team can afford probably one regular season loss depending on the opponent. The main reason is that they are just like darlings in the net rankings. Like they're still top 10 in the net rankings. And I think that could carry the day. I think they could lose to Baylor or at Iowa State and keep that host seed. Losing to KU might be a different story, particularly as a home game. Ideally you just went out and win a game in Kansas City and you just don't even think about it. I do think that we should be able to host. I think it's going to be less of a concern than it was last year, because last year we honestly didn't think we were going to host until like the moment that we found out that we were hosting. So I think the bigger question is going to be, is it a 3 or a 4 seed? 3 seed definitely requires winning out the regular season, pick up a game in Kansas City, I guess, depending on how everybody else does. 4 seed, I think we could definitely like drop a game. Particularly, I think that Iowa State game, I think we could drop that one if we play it close, but I don't know. That's again, like these aren't conversations that we should be having because this team is more talented than these conversations. But this is like year 3 or 4 in a row of a kind of mid to late February collapse for K-State women's basketball, which is really disappointing.
Yeah. And for the record, the latest, the schedule reveal that they had K-State as the last 3 seed at number 12. Latest bracketology has them listed. I think that would be the 14th or 15th overall seed. So dropping 2 spots, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's just slightly worrying, especially because, this team shouldn't be in that situation. But I think that once the further and further we get away from the West Virginia game, the better it will feel. But I also think that the West Virginia game it's not even close to the worst loss in the year. I still don't understand how we lost that Colorado game. God, that's annoying.
Yeah, there's no reason we should have lost that game. I don't know what it is about Colorado that Jeff Mittie just like cannot get over the hump, because Jeff Mittie, even going back to TCU in his Mountain West days, has never beaten Colorado, which is absolutely absurd.
The final 3 games, Connor went over them earlier, is at KU for the Sunflower Showdown. Ayoka Lee should be back, which I feel like we should have mentioned that a little earlier, but allegedly Iocali is coming back for senior day up against KU. And yeah, that'll be fun. It'll be nice to have Yoki back towards the back end. Of course, you wish she never got hurt because, God, every year it's the same thing.
Yeah, but at least we're getting her back, I think, a little earlier than we initially thought we were going to.
Yeah, we didn't think we'd see her until the tournament, Big 12 tournament, I should clarify.
I always thought the target was Iowa State, but I suppose it's really not that much of a difference because it's just a 1-game difference. But it's we're getting her back about a week to week and a half, 2 weeks earlier than we expected. So I'm pretty happy about that. I imagine Yokali's going to be playing through a little bit of pain probably to get back this quickly. If I had to imagine, I mean, because like barring literal witchcraft, there is no possible way to extort her for more eligibility. So
there's no way. Unless eligibility literally just stops meaning things, which
shouldn't put that out of the possibility at this point. So
yeah. But that's the women's game, and I already forgot the order that we were going to go to. Were we going to do men's and then Batcats, or Batcats and then men's?
I think men's. I think.
Okay. So whereas the women's team had a letdown week because we, just by virtue of losing one game and it matters for host seeding, the men's team had a letdown week by doing the exact thing that we said that they couldn't afford to do, and that was lay an egg on the road trip to Utah. Granted, both schools in the state of Kansas did this exact same thing, but
yeah, we had it better than KU did. KU got beat by Utah, and then just historically destroyed by BYU. I mean, it was like a non-conference bye game blowout. Like, it was bad.
Yeah, and K-State ends up dropping 80-65 against BYU and then 74-69 up against Utah. BYU is understandable. You can't afford to lose against Utah. And I'm basically right back to, at-large bid's completely dead. You may as well just rest everyone else for the rest of the season up until you get to the Big 12 tournament, because that's the only way you're making the dance.
If you're going to look for something to be positive about in this upcoming slate, the next 3 games are all very winnable games. Arizona State, we already beat them on the road, and we're going to be hosting them. UCF has been really struggling this year, and Colorado just recently got their first Big 12 win of the season. So their first Big 12 win in like 14 years, which is kind of funny to say without any additional context. Traveling to Cincinnati will be tough. Then Iowa State at home for senior day. That's going to be a fun game regardless. Because remember last year, I think we ended our year with the same slate of games last year, Cincinnati away and then Iowa State at home for senior day. So I don't know how we managed to get the same games on the same area of the schedule and the same locations as well 2 years in a row. But it is pretty much if you like, K-State needs to win out these last 5, and if they don't, then they probably need to pick up 2 in Kansas City at minimum. It's not dead, but dropping that Utah game made things much more difficult than they needed to be, which, granted, it seems that we've maybe thrived in those situations where we make things more difficult than they need to be, and put ourselves in impossible must-win situations. So hopefully we're back and ready to perform against Arizona State this upcoming Sunday. But man, it's going to be a challenge down the stretch here, and we're going to really need to pick up a game or 2 in the Big 12 tournament as well. But Every game left on our schedule is a winnable game in one sense or another, in that either we're like definitely like the superior team, or in that we have beaten them previously this year. So there is that to look up for, I guess.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, the K-State is currently listed as next 4 out in the latest bracketology. We're the third to last team in next 4 out. So we're theoretically right there, but maybe it's just the entire week getting to me, but it feels so like that gap feels so bad, dude.
Yeah. The issue right now is that these next 3 games, while all very winnable, aren't going to really help our resume all that much. Arizona State might a little bit, but it's really going to be that like Cincinnati game. That's going to be our next game that's like really going to help us. It feels like, because Colorado has just been awful this year, and UCF has been, particularly as of late, pretty bad. So I think that we should be able to pick up a few more games here, but obviously picking up at least one of those games in Utah would have made life much easier, because we could have picked a mulligan in these upcoming games, like just one night to have a bad night. But oh man, dropping that game to Utah, that was pretty brutal.
Yeah. And for the record, BYU has moved up all the way to the last 4 buys. So that I can't say I'm surprised by that, but
I'm honestly surprised they didn't get off the bubble entirely, because I know that they were last 4 in when we played them. So that's a little bit surprising they didn't get a little bit more of a bump. But I guess that's just life on the bubble this time of year.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, KU's still going to make the tournament. They're currently listed as a 5 seed because losses don't mean anything when you're a blue blood.
Yeah. ESPN BPI like still has them as like a top 15 team. Jay Billis listed them as 15th, I think, or 11th or something in his top 25 polls. Although Jay Billis, like if you're a fan of a blue blood team, there is no one that you should like more than Jay Billis. So there's that. But yeah, it's a tough slate here for K-State, particularly those last 2 games. And then, of course, getting to Kansas City. I have no idea who you're going to face, but yeah, it's I'll still be watching down the stretch. This team, in one way or another, has figured it out in some fashions, and despite their poor play in Utah, I don't think that they've given up.
No, I don't think that they've given up. I just think that Coleman Hawkins, and I don't want to pin this all on Coleman Hawkins because it's not all on Coleman Hawkins, but he's picked very, very bad times to have the 2 worst games of the year.
Yeah, and frankly, it's been his 3 worst. That Arizona game, he was really bad in that game, but we were able to kind of look past it because we survived bad Coleman Hawkins in that game. But we were not able to survive bad Coleman Hawkins against BYU or Utah. I think if we get average Coleman Hawkins, I think we beat Utah, and BYU is at least closer. I don't know if good Coleman Hawkins makes up 15 points, but it's tough to say. I mean, because he was really bad in this past weekend. Honestly, it's to the point where I think he's hurt. Like we've gone past the point of I think he's just genuinely playing poorly to the it's so bad I think he's got like a knee thing going on, like especially based on it seemed like he was kind of limping onto the floor a few times in the Utah game when he was subbing in getting to the free throw line. So I don't know, I feel like he might be hurt because these last 3 games have just been wildly out of character for him.
Yeah, and he picked the worst time to do it. But I feel like that's all we really need to say about the men's team is technically still on the bubble, but it feels so much farther away now than it was before. And now we get to talk about the Batcats, which, yes, they did start 1-4, and there's not a whole lot of true positives to go over, but there are still a few things that I think are encouraging about this team. To just quickly go over the games that they played. Lost to Washington 2-9, lost to Coastal 3-8, beat St. Joseph's 12-7, then lost to Coastal again 2-9. Battled up against number 6 North Carolina 9-12 in a game that apparently Pete Hughes is protesting. But what I will say is that I kind of want to focus most on the North Carolina game, A, because that was the only one that I found time to watch, and B, Washington was bad last year, but I think they really kind of hit a metaphorical home run with their new coach, who was a JUCO guy, and I think at Utah Valley. I think that'll be a really good hire. St. Joseph's is bad, and Coastal is going to be good. But I feel somewhat encouraged by the North Carolina game in a weird way, mostly because Dante Lewis looked really good on the mound. He just didn't get any help, and that's why he couldn't escape the first inning, because defense is there. Here's the big bugaboo. This is probably the worst defensive team up to this point of the Pete Hughes era, and that's saying a lot because he has fielded some horrible fielding teams.
Yeah, I know fielding percentage is not a good stat, but K-State is still dead last in fielding percentage in the Big 12, and it's probably not close. But yeah, that first inning was just absolutely brutal for the K-State defense. It was just a slew of errors and mishaps that took K-State from a 2-0 start to down 4-2 and already on their second pitcher. And Dante Lewis, who admittedly was having some struggles finding the zone, wasn't pitching poorly. He was walking a few guys, but he was also getting some big strikeouts against a really good baseball team. And frankly deserved a lot more support from his infield than he got. I mean, frankly, it's, I think, super embarrassing the defensive backup that a true freshman pitcher got in his first career start on the road against the number 6 team. And we have guys muffing routine grounders that would get a double play and get us out of the inning.
Yeah, I tweeted about it, but as a pitcher, I tried to remain cool every time that I pitched, but there was one outing that just kept coming into my mind that reminds me why I crash out every single time I just see horrible fielding. And it was where there was 3 errors in a row. And I legitimately the coach came out, looked at me and said, "Yeah, you should be out of this inning, but you're not. Sorry, buddy." And then just walked back. Anyway, I get really mad about stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, I was getting pretty frustrated, and I haven't played baseball since I was like 12. So it's I share your frustration, maybe not to the same degree though, or lived experience. But there still broadly have been a few bright spots. AJ Vasco, he has played in all 5 games. I got a couple of starts. He's true freshman. He was a high school All-American. He's off to a great start. He's admittedly not had a lot of plate appearances so far, but he's 5 for 9 with 3 doubles and an RBI and drawn a couple of walks already. So he's off to a decent start. Seth Dardar, despite some fielding miscues, has been hitting well. He's hitting 450 through 20 at bats so far. So
yeah, and a 1.25 OPS. And if you're, not to interrupt, but for a general rule, a 700 OPS is about average. In college, you're probably looking more for like 750s. Seth Dardar is 1.25.
Yeah, he's been very good so far. His on base, his raw on base alone is 500. So he's getting on base half the time they're stepping up to the plate. Kyle Lotus has had a surprisingly good start to the year. Well, I don't want to say surprisingly, but he's hitting better than he has in the past. Been a bit more consistent, 4 for 13, but drawn 2 walks, been hit by 2 pitches as well. So a solid start for Kyan Lotus. And we've seen a ton of players so far this year. Pete Hughes, like we kind of thought he would in our interview with Brian Smoller in the Batcat preview. He has been kind of playing around with a lot of different players getting on the field. So we've seen plenty of guys through just a handful of games already getting on the field.
Yeah. I mean, the only people that have played or have started all 5 games are Seth Dardar, D. Kennedy at third base, who has a 7.56 OPS, David Bishop, who has a 7.28 OPS, Nick English, who's playing right field, 7.62, and then weirdly enough, the outlier is Keegan O'Connor, KOC, who started all 5 games. Shintaro Inoue didn't start up against North Carolina, but did pinch hit. A lot of what I'm looking for now with this team is kind of, we mentioned it, this is a young team. They're just as liable to beat anyone as they are to lay an egg up against anyone, just because they're such a young team. I mean, Caden Phillips is the quote-unquote elder statesman on this team, and I think he's only like a junior, isn't he?
He's a junior or senior. I can't recall.
Yeah. But it was notable yesterday against North Carolina, which we just timed this episode. We're recording a day early. But it was worth noting that the UNC announcer, which, by the way, I think he did a very good job. He did such a good job that it's very rare that we give third parties props for how well they do calling the game. He did an amazing job calling the game.
He was really good.
He said that Nick English is basically is treated as the elder statesman. Nick English is 19.
He is a sophomore. Maybe that's why he grew a beard this offseason, because I noticed he started with the facial hair, so maybe he's trying to appear more elderly and statesmanly.
It could be, but I'm not horribly worried about the offense for this team. And just because that's baseball and it's a young team, so I'm expecting inconsistencies there. And I can't even really blame the pitchers because, granted, the team ERA is 7.5, which is horrid, but they're also not getting a whole lot of defensive help behind them, which causes you as a pitcher to start pressing because you're like, oh, damn, I have to get a swing and miss. And it's just not a winning formula. Ty Rule is having a lot of early season struggles. He seems to be incapable of not pitching to a full count early in the year. Blake Dean has been all right outside of like a few mishap pitches. I'd actually say Blake Dean's been good, but I would honestly say that I think the most pleasant surprise, at least just looking at what I've seen from the game, would be James Guyette. I think he's shown a lot of progress that he wasn't showing last year. And you look at the stats, like, dude has a 17 ERA. What do you mean? That's one bad inning. And that's the problem with rate stats, especially early on. He'll throw one inning and his ERA will be down to like 4. But what he showed, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I'm glad you brought him up because I think that he's been really good so far. He threw like 1 inning last year in the super regionals and like actually was very good. And I remember that distinctly because he pitched some early in the season and just got absolutely mashed. And then we didn't see him for like 2.5 months. And then he comes back and he's throwing sidearm all of a sudden and he's just destroying guys. So they unlocked something with James Guyette, I think. But again, pitchers, this is the tough part of being a Midwest baseball team is like we have an indoor facility. Like we have plenty of ways to get these guys ready for the season. But I mean, we've had 3 snowstorms in like the last month and a half here in Manhattan. There is only so much live baseball that you can play in the winter in Kansas, and no amount of indoor shenanigans are going to make up for actual live game action. And so we're just knocking a ton of rest off right now, like, because like it's doubly bad because we're very rusty from not having a lot of time outside, and we're very young and new. A lot of JUCO guys, 17 transfers, I believe, was the number that they mentioned on the broadcast, because we lost nearly everything after last year. So it's going to take some time for this team to gel. I'm also frustrated with starting 1-4, particularly the North Carolina game. I was really hoping that we'd get that game, but I'm just like nowhere even close to being out on this, because like if you went into this season expecting us to be 5-0 at this point, then I'm sorry, you're just delusional.
Yeah, I want the crack that you're smoking, because that was never going to happen.
That just was not a possibility. Sorry, but like still there are individually entertaining parts of this team. Dante Lewis, I think, is probably the next superstar for K-State baseball. I mean, he, as a true freshman, for the North Carolina game, batted third and started on the mound against the number 6 team in the country. That's like an 18-year-old kid. Like just talk about throwing someone to the fire.
Speaking of fire, he was throwing gas too. He was hitting like 97.
Yeah, he's at 96, 97 pretty consistently. Like, and again, if you're a box score watcher, like there's like you're gonna look at him and be like, oh, he didn't really do much in this game. He really did pitch well. It cannot be overstated how awful the fielding was in that first inning behind Dante Lewis. Maybe they all just hate him or something because it settled down after. But I think P kind of laid into him after he took Dante out of the game. But I don't know. And then, of course, the whole not making eye contact pitcher to batter thing that led to P. Hughes protesting the entire game.
Yeah.
Which, like, yeah, I know people like to get on Pete for going on tirades and, like, they question him as a manager and coach, which we've done on this show as well. But I think he's totally justified in being upset about how they were calling rule. Like, it was just a dumb exploitation loophole. And he was like, hey, this is really dumb. You guys should stop. And they were like, no. They just
Yeah. I think the scary part about this is, as much as it makes me feel like a doomer to say this, 1-10 is extremely possible looking at the next few games. And I think that is when you're in danger of I think Pete Hughes is a good enough motivator to where he's not going to lose the team. That does not mean that he's not going to lose the fan base, because they don't interact with him every day.
Yeah, I have no concern about Pete losing the team. Like that's just not even like on my radar. But I think he'd absolutely probably lose the fans if we start 1-10 for the most part, because we picked up a lot of people with that super regional run, and I don't think most of those people realize how much building went into that, how long it took to get to that point, and that, you know, unless you're a team in the Southeast or on the Pacific Coast, you're just not going to be able to rebuild or reload as quickly as some of those teams can. That's just not an option for the challenges that a team that is not in perpetual sunshine is in the face.
Yeah. And by the way, the reason we say 1-10 is on the table, number 5 Arkansas is the next game. That's going to happen the day this comes out. Michigan could be anything. They're kind of like Washington, except for they don't have a new coach, but they just could be anything. Then going up against TCU, and then we go on the Frisco Classic the next week, number 3 LSU, Sam Houston, who was a tournament team last year, and a ranked Nebraska team.
Yeah, that's I think we're looking in those LSU and Nebraska games, those are two potential conference favorites right there. Then Arkansas, they're also in the SEC. They're going to be right there as well. And the SEC is the best baseball conference. And granted, the Big Ten's not a great baseball conference. Again, weather plays such a massive factor in whether you're a good college baseball team or not. But Nebraska, of course, being one of the furthest south Big Ten teams, sans the West Coast ones, they're going to have a good shot to win their conference. So, I mean, Pete's scheduled tough, and that's what he's been doing. I don't have a problem with it, really. Hopefully it's going to help some guys kind of emerge, I think. I think we're starting to see that with Dante Lewis, who even after he was taken out in the first inning as a pitcher, he went on to have a pretty solid day at the plate. He had a hit and drew 2 walks. So he was able to remain focused in that sense.
Yeah. I just keep going back to the Brian Smaller interview where he said, he's scheduling these games for a reason. He's not scheduling these as bye games where we're going to get our brains bashed in. Being fair, we only got our brains bashed in once. But I think that Arkansas game, that might get ugly.
Yeah, there's a chance Arkansas might put up like 40 runs in that game, unless we just start like hitting guys and they call the game. Because I think they bring back a lot, and they're going to be taking it out on a team of mostly new players that are going to have no idea why they hate us so much.
What did they do to make them that mad?
Yeah, like we've got 2 starters back from that team, but so AJ Vasco was like algebra when this went on. Like, why are we taking it on him?
Bro was taking his world history final last year.
Yeah, Dante Lewis was doing his AP Gov exam, like when this all happened. But no, they're gonna take it out on him because they're gonna be upset that they got embarrassed at their own regional. I don't blame them. It's just gonna be a little bit funny.
It's also on Flow Sports, so no one in the known universe will be able to watch it.
Nope. That's the worst part. I think the next weekend's D1 baseball, which like I'm slightly more inclined to give them money to watch the stream because like it just feels more ethical. I don't know why.
It feels better because at least they've committed to a niche, and college baseball is like a niche enough sport to where it's like, I guess you can justify, like, I'd honestly pay just for their transfer portal tracker because I remember we kept using the free version, which was like 7 people.
Hopelessly in the dark is how it feels to try and track baseball recruiting and baseball transfers unless they have a Twitter account.
True. And if they have a Twitter account, they're probably following us and we're probably following them. Yep. Anyway, you have any final words before we put this week to bed?
Rough week, but I think that we can bounce back in the next week.
Yeah. What's next? Want to know?
Sure.
There's sometimes that I wish we still did the full video version of this show just so people could see the disappointment in your eyes when you said that. Anyway, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. If you want to email us, we're AggieVilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdward00.
I'm at Connor Boutzler, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store, link found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.